Hi,
Hey,
Amy.
good morning.
Hi, Jacob. How are you? Maybe
Morning.
for you, not morning for me, baby love. It's nearly 1 o'clock.
All right, that's true. We're just now breaking the noon hour here. Good morning. It's 15 minutes with your favorite accountants. It's Tuesday. I think we're calling this thing "Talk Me Off the Ledger," which is Beth's clever title. I love it.
Thanks.
Last week, we talked about the balance sheet and how it can be scary and if it's not maintained right, but it really is a big asset if you do maintain it right. But when we were talking about the balance sheet last week, we were talking about how you could really see the health of a business down in the liability and in the equity section. So we thought we would expand on that a little bit more. And again, I need to go back and say I'm with Beth Melcher and Jacob Schrader, and I'm Amy Walker, and we're accountant buddies. So anyways, we're going to talk a little bit about fuel for your tank, sources of capital, how you can get money to run your business, and once you get it, where do you put it on your balance sheet, and how do you account for it? Jacob, why don't you tee us up and give us an overview?
Yeah, so really as we look at capital, there's really three types of capital that you can get, especially when we're talking debt. So there's current liabilities, there's long-term liabilities. I'll kind of dive into what these are. There's also one that is not a debt section, but is equity. So you can get equity capital. People can give you the equity in. So when you look at current liabilities, typically you're looking at things like credit card debt. You're looking at line of credit. Your typical long-term liabilities are more your traditional bank loans. And then equity debt is money from your partners or from venture capitalists. So that's kind of the really high overview, the three different sections of types of capital that we can look at.
Excellent.
Okay, so I have a
Beth,
question for you, Amy. I have a question. What
Yeah.
types of things do you finance with different types of debt? Because it's important to consider, I think.
Okay. Well, I guess the obvious one is equipment that you may, or vehicles, things like that you may need for your business. And
Mhm.
I would finance that with bank debt. I mean, if I could, and that would be a long-term liability. Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, well, sometimes I've bumped into clients who will use their line of credit to buy equipment. And, my opinion about that and the bank's opinion about that is a line of credit will typically have to rest for 30, 60, 90 days based on the term of the loan. And folks who use lines of credit to buy things that don't turn as fast as they could, like equipment or a long-term asset, they clog up their line of credit and then can't let the line of credit rest. So there are times when, it's really important to consider the way you're going to finance things and make sure that the terms of the debt that you're getting into match your ability to pay it off. Just a thought. Like a building, probably a good thing to finance over a long period of time, not short.
Yeah, so
Would you say a line of credit is typically for working capital?
Mm-hmm. So what would that mean? I guess what does that term mean? Most of us probably know, but for those of you who maybe want to know what it means.
So for me, a line of credit or a credit card should be used for operating capital. So that is just like ordinary course of business, short-term financing for payroll. It's that short gap of I need money this week, we'll have money coming in next week, right? Or within that month. It's short-term. Definitely, we shouldn't be using credit card or line of credit debt for long-term debt. So if you're buying a long-term asset, something that's going to be lasting more than a year, typically that should be on long-term debt, right? So now your assets and your liabilities they would offset one another because you have a long-term asset to a long-term debt. And that's where I don't think a line of credit and a credit card should be used for those short-term pieces. And it should just be used for quick operating capital that's coming in and out in a relatively short time frame. Long-term debt, the bank debt, some other options in there. You should be looking at long-term assets that you're buying with that. Theoretically, you don't want to fund operations with long-term debt because if you're needing long-term debt to fund operations, that means we have a loss proposition that is not a good situation in the long run, and we're typically not going to be in a strong position to be viable as a business very long.
How many of you see the mistake that I think it's a mistake? I mean, I think debt, when used properly, is it's not an asset, but it's a tool. It's a business tool, right? But there are a lot of small businesses with one founder that, you know, they're using personal credit cards and mixing them up with their, you know, taking one credit card that has personal expenses on it, and they're using it for business purposes and getting it all mixed up. That's the number one no-no when it comes to credit cards in my book. Is, yeah, some people like to use a personal credit card because they rack up miles or points. But if you're going to do that, don't put any personal stuff on it. Keep it completely separate.
Yeah, I would agree there completely. And I also want to drive home the point that you made, that debt in a business is not always a bad thing, right? It can be a very useful tool. Mm-hmm. In your personal life. You know, I've talked to a lot of business owners like, well, Dave Ramsey says you shouldn't have any debt. And I'm like, well, that's great for your personal life, but that can actually be a real hindrance in business, especially if you're going for growth. Because sometimes growth takes capital, right? And you have to have capital, and you can leverage capital to turn in $1 into $2. So if I can get $1 of capital and I can turn it into $2 of profit, that's a no-brainer, right? So as you're looking at growth opportunities, many times you do need capital to pursue those. And that is where debt is a real benefit. So debt can be a strong benefit in a business. And it shouldn't be saying, oh, I'm in business, I'm going to be debt free. Now, that's a great thing to say, but no, that's probably going to limit your growth opportunities if you're determined to be debt free in your business. So debt can be a very strategic tool. And I don't think, you know, sometimes really small business owners have a negative outlook on debt in a business, but I think we just need to be aware it's a tool like a lot of other tools, and used correctly can be a very powerful thing for your business and enable you to achieve things you wouldn't otherwise achieve in your business.
Well, and we know that from our personal lives, because I'd still be living in a studio apartment above a record store if it weren't for debt, because we all go in to get mortgages, or for those of us who've chosen to buy a house, we have to get a mortgage in order to move out of the studio. And so I'm very grateful for that. Pardon me?
Long-term debt to long-term asset, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a very similar proposition there.
I think so too.
Long-term debt to long-term asset. Now,
I think when people are thinking about whether or not they're going to take on debt, it's really important to think about what are you going to do with the money. I like to do a small business plan and just say, what kind of growth are we looking at? What is it we're trying to achieve? Maybe it's development of a division or opening a new location, and just saying, you know, what's my upside? What additional business am I, you know, what kind of top line income am I going to bring in? What additional resources do I need? Does it make sense to get into debt in order to do that? And oftentimes it'll be, yeah. But I think it's important, if, like Jacob and Amy were saying before, if you're acquiring debt because you've got consistent operating shortfall, I think that's a problem. But if you're going to be augmenting your business and growing, I think it's really awesome to consider using debt as the capital in order to extend future growth.
Yeah, I mean,
that old saying that you have to spend a little money to make a little money, that's when you can use debt to your benefit. And for accountants, I mean, like most accountants hate debt, right? Just because that's our nature. We're conservative in nature. We don't want, at the end of the day, we want to be able to keep our profits and not have to service debt. But you have to learn with experience and some projections. If I take out this line of credit, will it allow me to bring that new line of purses into my retail boutique? And I know I've already pre-sold how many of them. I know that we're going to make money off that. Take the time to project what you can do with that debt, not just have it there, obviously, or not just take it out to pay off other debt. That's the cycle that you hate to see, is taking out new debt to pay off old debt. That's a bad cycle to be in.
I see people dip into lines of credit to pay tax obligations from a prior year, and they just keep digging deeper. And that's like when it comes time to pay the tax return, that's a little rough when you see stuff like that. But.
Yeah, the ideal situation for like a line of credit would be, okay, we are buying things and we only get 15-day terms to buy them, and we're going to resell them. Typically, our sales cycle to sell them is 30 days. So this is a perfect use case for a line of credit, right? You have to pay your supplier 15 days before you sell, before you get money in, right? So now bridging that is a perfect example of operating capital. It's that bridge financing to get you from 15 days to 30 days of when you had the problem. So those are ideal cases for operating capital. As you said, Beth, it's not the ideal case that you're robbing your line of credit to pay a tax liability from last year. That's a case where you should have done proper planning last year and put money back for your taxes to leverage that accordingly. And I mean, as long as you have a plan for that, there are strategies where we've done this because, hey, instead of tapping the line of credit last year to bridge from 15 days to 30 days, we use the money we should have put back for taxes. Because that was the strategy. Instead of paying interest all of last year on that money, we're only going to pay it now while we had there. So once again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but having that plan for your capital and understanding what your capital spend plan is a real important piece of looking at debt.
So we promised ourselves we weren't going to go over 15 minutes. So we've got 5 minutes left, and we have not talked about equity, which is another form of fuel for your business, money for your business, fuel for your tank. Equity. The simplest one is when the owner starts a business and they put $1,000 in the bank account to get things going before they start having sales. And at the very simplest form, an owner's contribution that hopefully they get to recoup one day in the form of a distribution or in the future profits of their business. So that's very simple. What if a family member says, well, I'd like to help you out. I don't want any ownership in your business. So I'll give you, $50,000 to start, and then you choose to put that in your business. How would you put that on your books and go about paying that back?
I'd do a loan because I don't want to have to deal with partnerships. That's just my personal. Getting into a partnership, if we're talking about this, if you want someone's money and they want a piece of the action, be really thoughtful and talk to an attorney, please, before you go woohoo and take the money and say, I'll just throw this in. We can be partners. I would keep them out of my book and as a loan. I don't want to answer the equity section. I can do it. I see it a lot with husbands and wives, and because I do smaller business. So I think maybe you guys could answer that partnership equity question better than I could.
There's two different ways to do this. And one is treating it as a loan. The business has a loan to your aunt, right? Or whoever that is. It says there is a loan structure there. And if that happens, really make sure that loan's documented, right? The IRS requires that you do pay an interest rate. There has to be a nominal rate, right? Or they're giving a gift if you're not charging an interest rate. So there is an applicable federal rate that needs charged there if you do a loan. The other way I would handle that is typically an agreement between the owner individually and the family member. And then the owner is contributing that capital in as owner capital in as equity. And that's typically how we structure it on the owner side, is one of those two methods, right? It either comes to the owner individually and contributes in, or it comes directly into the business. Now, depending upon the business, and I'm not going to dive into this, the big tax concept of debt basis, there could be advantages to different ways, depending on entity structure, what that looks like. So I think there is a lot of planning in there of how that looks. If you just have a family member that does it, right? There's also the potential, though, once you're up and going, that family member does want a piece of that pie long term. So now we have an equity section, and we can sell a portion of that business to a family member in exchange for capital. And then that comes down there, whether it's a family member, whether it's another individual, we have a capital section there. And we can either sell a portion of that business, we can, in a partnership, you can literally just sell rights to future profits and not a portion of the prior business. It's just rights to future profits is really what you're selling there instead of part of the capital account. But that gets capital into the business to allow you to move forward. Typically,
you must see that a lot in like legal practices, medical practices, where additional partners are coming in. That's pretty typical, right?
And then you see this in venture businesses, right? Like, so as we're a startup and we want venture capital, we are selling shares in our business to a venture capitalist for a large amount of funding to go and pursue an idea and try to launch this company and really scale it. I think the important thing I talk about is, equity capital, the uses of it should be targeted differently, right? It's that startup capital. It is getting moving there.
It's for growth. It is for growth.
Yes, it's for growth. And I think that's an important thing, is it is truly designed as growth capital. It's not necessarily as much as for long-term assets. It's not necessarily as much for operating capital. Now you can use it for those, but you should really look at your capital section and say, we should be leveraging that for growth, not for typical ordinary business. Because the hope is, if it's ordinary business, let's use somebody else's money to fund those things instead of our own, and use our money and the capital money to fund growth. And that's kind of how we look at it and try to balance those out, because equity capital is the most expensive type of capital there is. When you give up equity, it's way more expensive than the interest rate you're going to pay on somebody else's debt.
Especially now. Holy cow.
So,
right? I mean, what's a line of credit, interest on a line of credit right now? Like nothing.
Yeah, money's cheap. That's what I was thinking too.
capital is expensive.
So if you had to, let's put like VC money aside. Let's put equity. Let's wrap up and say in ranking of what you've seen, what you put it, if you had to choose debt, like what order would you go in? Like credit cards, lines of credit. We'd even talk about like AR factoring and things like that. That's something else. I don't know. What would your top two be if you had to choose a form of debt or choose a form of funding?
Well, to me, AR and AP terms are the place to start, if you even want to count that as a source. So I'm going to collect money from my clients as fast as I can and pay my vendors as slowly as I can. And by playing that spread, that's free. As long as you can turn it fast enough. So that's my first, if that counts.
I would agree. Definitely start there, right? The better you can get those terms and you can play that float, instead of paying your vendor at 15 days and getting paid at 30, you want to get paid at 15 and pay your vendor at 30. Mm-hmm. Always, right? Then after that, I think it depends upon your terms of use, right? So if you're buying capital assets, definitely go long-term debt because your interest rate's going to be lower. If you can truly do within 30 days and you don't really need any financing beyond 30 days, I really like credit cards because then no interest, as long as you're paying it off in 30 days and you're keeping that cycle going. So we really like to start with a credit card because that buys us, say, $10,000, and it's just enough on these small businesses. It's a 30-day revolving line. We have to pay off what we use every 30 days, but that's a great place to start. Now, if you're going to be carrying a balance more than 30 days, do not use a credit card. Go get a line of credit, right?
Yeah.
From whom?
Leverage that for that short
Like from whom? So what do you think? Like, what if you, I know, I'm sure we're over Amy, but the PPP experience has been really interesting to me because people go around and they shop for lines of credit. Sorry for the motorcycles in the background. So can you hear them? Is it like super loud? Sorry. Okay. We have sun like for the last day of the year. We won't have sun again until April. So I'm thinking it's really important for you to create a decent relationship with your local banker, because when it came time to get the PPP done, if you had a line of credit from who knows where bank, and then you needed to process your PPP, you're kind of SOL. So I think being really careful about the banker relationship that you create to get your line of credit is a big deal. So that's something I think to manage with when you're looking at interest rates and fees only, is to also put some weight on the relationship that your bank has with you. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I love local banks. There's interesting factors in here though, which I think was a great topic for another conversation. Like, certain banks have to have collateralized loans. Other banks are willing to do line of credits uncollateralized. So those limits on financing and how you get truly access to these different types of capital, I think is a great topic for a future conversation that we have.
Excellent. Okay, so we are going over time. We could just talk accounting all day long. No, no. Before we sign off, if anybody sees this later and has some topics that they want to hear, maybe some burning questions they have about accounting, and things that we could share in future episodes, we'll be happy to do that. We will sign off the way we did last week. Tell us where the people can find you online and on social media.
I'll go. I'm Beth Melcher, Money Fit. We changed our Instagram handle this week just to keep it kind of exciting. It's at bemoneyfit.com, bemoneyfit.com. See you there on Instagram.
Wonderful. Jacob.
Twitter, Jacob B. Schrader. Website's ascendllc.co.
We do how do you spell ascend?
ASCEND.
Like to rise up.
Yes.
Excellent.
All right. We are
And who are you?
Agency. WalkerAgency.us is the website, and our socials are all WA1KER Agency. Walker, and the L is a 1. All right. Always good to see you guys. We will see you next week.